Have you ever had a feeling so strong that you couldn't ignore it? A feeling that something terrible was about to happen. For one father in Mississippi, that feeling became a nightmare he would never wake up from. This is the story of Jesse Bardwell, a young woman whose search for love led her hundreds of miles from home and into the path of a man investigators would later describe as dangerous, deceptive, and deadly. Before we begin, remember that this case involves real people and real loss. Welcome back to The Final Clue, where I tell true crime stories with the utmost care and respect for the victims bearable for my community. If you haven't already, please subscribe. It really helps me to continue in bringing important stories to you. Now settle in and let's begin. Jesse Bardwell was 27 years old. Friends and family described her as adventurous, caring, independent, and full of life. She had the kind of personality that could light up a room. She was close to her family, especially her father, Gary. From the time Jessie was a little girl, the bond between father and daughter was unmistakable. Gary often joked that she never outgrew wanting to be carried around. Even as she became an adult, they stayed in regular contact. A phone call, a text message, a quick check-in before bed. Those small routines meant everything. Then, one day, everything changed. Without much warning, Jessie left her hometown in Mississippi and moved roughly 500 miles away to Richardson, Texas. To her family, the decision seemed sudden and completely unlike her. The reason soon became clear. Jessie had fallen for a man named Jason Lowe. At first, her family tried to be supportive. They wanted her to be happy. But when Gary finally met Jason, something immediately felt off. Jason had a story for everything. He claimed to have lived an exciting life. He boasted about experiences that sounded impressive. But the more Gary listened, the less believable the stories became. One claim stood out. Jason reportedly told people he had been a Navy SEAL. Gary didn't buy it for a second. And while the stories bothered him, something else worried him even more. Jessie was changing. The daughter who once called constantly was becoming increasingly distant. Phone calls became rare. Text messages slowed down. Sometimes when Gary tried to reach her, Jason answered instead. Whenever he asked to speak directly with Jessie, there always seemed to be an excuse. She was busy. She was upset. She would call back later. But later never came. As months passed, Gary's concern grew into fear. He repeatedly told Jessie that something about Jason didn't feel right. He even urged her to come home. But Jessie refused. She insisted everything was fine. Still, her father couldn't shake the feeling that she was not being completely honest. Then came a nightmare. Says Gary later recalled dreaming that Jessie was no longer alive. It wasn't just a bad dream. It felt different. It stayed with him, day after day. He tried to convince himself he was overreacting. But deep down, he believed something was terribly wrong. By early 2016, communication with Jessie had nearly stopped. For a family that had once spoken with her regularly, the silence was alarming. Then came Mother's Day. Jessie didn't call. For many families, that might not seem unusual. For Jessie's family, it was unthinkable. Panic immediately set in. Gary tried calling again. And once again, Jason answered. The conversation quickly became heated. Frustrated and desperate, Gary warned that he was coming to Texas himself if he didn't get answers. Jason didn't seem concerned. That response only made things worse. After weeks of fear and uncertainty, Gary climbed into his truck and began the long drive from Mississippi to Texas. 11 hours. 11 hours filled with anger, worry, and a growing sense of dread. When he arrived, he didn't go looking for arguments. He went straight to police. A missing persons report was filed, and investigators began digging into Jessie's disappearance. Officers soon questioned Jason. He claimed he didn't know where Jessie was. According to him, she had simply left. But detectives quickly discovered serious problems with his story. One of the biggest involved Jessie's vehicle. Jason claimed she drove away in it shortly before disappearing. Investigators tracked down the car. There was only one problem. The vehicle had already been sold weeks earlier. Jason's timeline didn't make sense. And that was only the beginning. When investigators searched areas connected to him, they uncovered disturbing evidence. Inside a garage connected to Jason, officers noticed a powerful odor. Veteran detectives immediately recognized it. The smell was consistent with decomposition. The investigation intensified. Forensic teams examined a vehicle connected to Jason and discovered indications that blood had been present in the cargo area. The evidence was mounting. Yet one critical piece was still missing: Jesse herself. Without finding her, prosecutors faced a major challenge. Meanwhile, investigators began uncovering troubling details from Jason's past. A former girlfriend described a relationship filled with fear and violence. She recounted an incident in which she believed she was fighting for her life. Her statements painted a disturbing picture of a man capable of extreme aggression. The more detectives learned, the more convinced they became that Jesse had not simply disappeared. Something terrible had happened. Still, Jason refused to cooperate. Then everything changed. While in custody, he began discussing the case with someone he believed he could trust. What he didn't realize was that his words would become a crucial part of the investigation. For the first time, he placed himself with Jesse during the period surrounding her death. He claimed her death was an accident. According to his version of events, the two had been together when she suffered a fatal injury. But investigators found his explanation difficult to reconcile with the evidence. Even more troubling was what happened afterward. Instead of contacting authorities, instead of calling for help, instead of notifying her family, Jesse disappeared. And so did the truth. Facing overwhelming pressure, Jason eventually offered information that could lead investigators to her location. In exchange, prosecutors agreed to limit his potential sentence. He then directed authorities to a remote area outside the city. There, after an agonizing search, investigators finally found Jesse Bardwell. For her family, the discovery brought heartbreak rather than relief. The young woman they had spent months searching for was gone. The father who had trusted his instincts from the very beginning was forced to face the reality he had feared most. At trial, jurors heard evidence about the investigation, the contradictions in Jason's statements, and the events that followed Jesse's disappearance. They also learned details that left many people stunned. While Jesse's family desperately searched for her, evidence suggested Jason was focused on entirely different things. The contrast was difficult for many in the courtroom to comprehend. In the end, the jury rejected the accident explanation. Saying since, Jason Lowe was convicted in connection with Jesse Bardwell's death and sentenced to decades in prison. But for Jesse's family, no sentence could undo what happened. No verdict could restore the future that was stolen. Today, Jessie is remembered not for the tragedy that ended her life, but for the life she lived before it. A daughter, a sister, a friend, a young woman with dreams, plans, and people who loved her. And perhaps the most haunting part of this entire case is that a father sensed danger long before anyone else. He called. He warned. He begged. And when the silence finally became too much to ignore, he drove hundreds of miles searching for answers. Unfortunately, the answer waiting for him was the one he had feared all along.